Ghost of Yotei brought these weapons back into the world. The Odachi, the Kusarigama, the Tanegashima, the Yari, the Katana. You've seen them in the game, you've felt how brutal they are. But here's what makes them even more insane. These weren't invented for a game. Every single one of these weapons was real. And Miyamoto Musashi, arguably the greatest swordsman who ever lived, faced them all. So we did what any reasonable person would do. We dueled them too. This is what Ghost of Yotei's weapons looked like in the hands of history. One quick thing, each of these duels has its own full episode on the channel. So if you want to go straight to a specific weapon, those videos are all up separately. But if you want the whole experience, every weapon, every duel, start to finish, stay right here. This is the complete run. This channel is built around one thing: taking the epic stories we experience in video games and actually bringing them to life. Whatever we play, whatever world pulls us in, we try to go deeper. The history, the weapons, the lore behind it all. We've got our weapons series running alongside this, and World of Yotei is live on the channel right now. If that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole, like, subscribe, and hit notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's start where Musashi faced his biggest challenge, literally. The Odachi is the longest blade he ever dueled against. And size, as you'll see, is not always an advantage. April 13th, 1612. Two warriors, one island. A duel that would echo through history for over 400 years. Sasaki Kojiro, the master of the 3-foot blade, undefeated, feared across Japan. Miyamoto Musashi, the wandering ronin with 60 victories and 0 losses. Only one would leave that island alive. This is the story of the most legendary duel in samurai history. Sasaki Kojiro was 27 years old, a Kenshi, a sword saint, and the chief weapons master of the Hosokawa clan. By this point in his life, Kojiro had become so skilled that he could fend off 3 opponents using nothing but a tessen, a metal fan. His reputation was legendary, but his true weapon? That's what made him terrifying. Monohoshizao, the laundry pole, or the drying pole. An Odachi forged by the master swordsmith Ichihara Nagamitsu in the Bizen tradition. The blade alone measured over 3 shaku. That's approximately 90 to 100 centimeters, or about 35 inches. For context, the average katana blade was around 70 centimeters. Kojiro's sword was nearly 50% longer. It looked like the bamboo poles used for drying clothes, hence the nickname. But there was nothing mundane about it. Kojiro had mastered this seemingly unwieldy weapon to perfection. He founded his own school of swordsmanship called Ganryu, the large rock style, named after the very island where he would meet his fate. His signature technique was the Tsubame Geishi, the turning swallow cut. The move mimicked the flight of a swallow, a fluid downward strike immediately followed by a lightning-fast upward slash. Legend said this technique was so fast it could catch a bird mid-flight, with speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. That's 124 miles per hour. With a 3-foot blade moving at that velocity, if it connected, you were done. Kojiro had studied under Toda Saigen, a master of the Chujo-ryu style who specialized in the kodachi, the short sword. As a sparring partner, Kojiro used the nodachi against his master's short blade, learning to exploit reach and timing until he surpassed even Saigen's younger brother in combat. That's when he left to forge his own path. By 1610, Kojiro was untouchable, feared, respected. And then Miyamoto Musashi challenged him. Musashi was already a legend in his own right. By the time of this duel, he had won over 60 duels without a single loss. He had developed Nittenichi Ryu, the 2 heavens as one style, wielding both a katana and a wakizashi simultaneously, something almost no one else did. But even Musashi knew Kojiro was different. The duel was set for dawn on Ganryu Island, a small, isolated piece of land off the coast of Japan. Kojiro arrived early, prepared, focused, ready, and Musashi didn't show up. Hours passed, the sun rose higher, and still no Musashi. This wasn't an accident. This was psychological warfare. Musashi knew Kojiro's temperament. Proud, precise, disciplined. Making him wait would plant doubt. It would stoke anger. It would disrupt the mental clarity that a swordsman of Kojiro's caliber relied on. And it worked. When Musashi finally stepped off the boat, Kojiro was seething. But Musashi had one more trick. While traveling to the island, he had carved a bakken, a wooden sword, out of an oar. And this bakken? It was longer than Kojiro's Odachi. Musashi had negated Kojiro's greatest advantage, reach. The duel itself was shockingly brief. Kojiro drew first, unleashing his legendary Tsubame Gaishi. The blade sliced through the air at over 200 kilometers per hour, aimed directly at Musashi's head. It missed by inches. Some accounts say it cut Musashi's headband clean off. In that single moment, the fraction of a second it took for Kojiro to recover from the swing, Musashi struck. His longer bokken came down hard, shattering Kojiro's left ribs. Before Kojiro could react, Musashi delivered a second devastating blow to his skull. Sasaki Kojiro fell. Musashi turned and walked away without looking back. He had won. But years later, when reflecting on his life and the countless duels he fought, Musashi would say that Sasaki Kojiro was the strongest opponent he had ever faced, not the most famous, not the most decorated, the strongest. So what does this duel teach us? Kojiro had everything: superior reach, a legendary technique, years of mastery, an undefeated record. And yet, he lost not because he lacked skill, but because Musashi understood something Kojiro didn't. Strategy beats technique, psychology beats precision, and adaptation beats raw power. Musashi didn't just fight with his sword, he fought with his mind. He disrupted Kojiro's mental state. He negated his reach advantage. He forced Kojiro to fight on his terms, not Kojiro's. And in the end, that made all the difference. The island where they fought? It's now called Ganryu Island, named after Kojiro's school, not Musashi's, because even in defeat, Kojiro's legend endures. His mastery of the Odachi, his Tsubame Geishi, his unwavering dedication to perfection. Sasaki Kojiro may have lost the duel, but he won immortality. The Odachi you can see coming. The Kusarigama? You never quite know where it's going, and neither did Musashi. Next up, the weapon that had him thinking on his feet. Autumn 1607, a mountain path in Iga province. Two warriors face each other. One holds twin swords, blades that have never tasted defeat. The other wields something far more dangerous, a chain and sickle that can strike from distances no sword can reach. Miyamoto Musashi, the wandering swordsman with over 20 kills to his name, stands across from Shishido Baiken, the Kusarigama master who teaches his deadly art not in dojos, but in the wilderness where his weapon thrives. The chain begins to spin. The air fills with the sound of metal cutting through the crisp autumn breeze. This isn't a duel of honor. This is a duel of survival. Because when a Kusarigama master fights, terrain becomes weapon, and distance becomes death. One of them will walk away. The other will never leave this mountain. This is the story of the duel that proved sometimes the most unconventional weapon meets the most unconventional swordsman. To understand this duel, you first need to understand the man wielding the chain. Shishido Baiken remains one of history's most enigmatic figures. Unlike the noble samurai immortalized in scrolls and paintings, Baiken operated in the shadows. He wasn't a dojo master with a prestigious lineage. He was something far more dangerous. A teacher who trained his students in the fields and mountains where real combat happens. The historical record is frustratingly sparse. The first mention of him appears in the Nitenki, written in 1776, almost 170 years after his death, where he's simply called Shishido Nanegashi, which essentially means Shishido someone. His full name, Bacon, was popularized by novelist Eiji Yoshikawa in the 1930s. But what we do know paints a picture of a formidable warrior. Bacon was a master of the Kusarigama, a weapon that combined a curved sickle blade with a weighted chain, typically 9 to 12 feet long. While samurai trained with swords in structured environments, Bacon had perfected a weapon that turned any open space into a killing ground. The chain could entangle swords, limbs, even necks. The sickle could slash, hook, and grapple. And the weighted end? That could crush skulls or wrap around throats. Some accounts suggest he taught as a ninja instructor in Iga province, the heartland of covert warfare. Whether this is true or romantic embellishment, one thing was certain. Bacon understood combat in a way most swordsmen didn't. He understood that a battlefield wasn't a flat training ground. It was chaos. And in chaos, the Kusarigama reigned supreme. By 1607, Bacon had built a reputation as a man who defeated swordmasters. His unconventional weapon and unconventional methods had proven deadly time and again. And when word reached him of a young wandering swordsman cutting down challengers across Japan, Bacon became interested, very interested. Now let's talk about the young warrior walking into Bacon's territory. In 1607, Miyamoto Musashi was approximately 23 years old, though some sources suggest he could have been as young as 20. This was not yet the legendary sword saint who would write the Book of Five Rings. This was a hungry, restless ronin on a warrior's pilgrimage, a musha shugyo. After surviving the catastrophic Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 on the losing side, Musashi had become masterless. Rather than settle into obscurity, he chose the path of endless refinement. From 1605 onward, he wandered Japan with a singular purpose: to test his sword against anyone willing to face him. And he was winning, constantly. By 1607, Musashi had already defeated over 20 opponents in mortal combat. His most famous victories, the systematic destruction of the Yoshioka school in Kyoto, had occurred just years earlier. He had faced and killed Seijuro Yoshioka in a Bakken duel, then defeated his brother Denshichiro. And finally, he'd fought off Matashichiro and dozens of armed Yoshioka students in a brutal ambush outside Kyoto. His reputation was spreading like wildfire across Japan. Here was a swordsman who fought with two swords, who showed up late to duels to unnerve opponents, who used psychological warfare as much as blade work. Musashi didn't just fight to win, he fought to dominate. But there was something different about Musashi during this period. He was still developing his philosophy, still testing theories. He had not yet achieved the mastery he would later become famous for. He was raw talent mixed with battlefield experience, driven by an almost obsessive need to prove his sword style worked against any opponent, with any weapon. As he traveled from Nara toward Edo in autumn 1607, Musashi's path would cross with Bacon's. Whether Bacon sought out Musashi or whether Musashi heard of the Kusarigama master and challenged him remains unclear. What is clear is that both men wanted this duel. Bacon wanted to humble the arrogant young swordsman. Musashi wanted to prove his swords could defeat any weapon, even one that defied the logic of traditional dueling. The confrontation happened on a mountain path near Bacon's training grounds in Iga province, a remote area thick with forest and uneven terrain. This was not a formal duel ground. No witnesses, no seconds, just two warriors and the wilderness. And this would prove crucial. When Musashi arrived, some accounts suggest he first encountered Bacon's students, or possibly a young girl described as Bacon's disciple, who attempted an ambush with her own Kusarigama. Musashi evaded the surprise attack at the last moment, his battle-hardened instinct saving his life. Bacon himself emerged, calling off the ambush and telling his student not to interfere. This was how Bacon had defeated other challengers, through surprise attacks and disorientation. But Musashi was different. He had survived battlefields, assassinations, and ambushes. He didn't rattle easily. The two men faced each other properly. Musashi carried his two swords, his katana and his wakizashi, the shorter companion blade. Bacon held his kusarigama, the chain coiled in his grip, the weighted end ready to strike. Then the chain began to spin. This was the kusarigama's terror. Unlike a sword with its fixed reach, the chain could strike from 12 feet away. It could change direction mid-flight. It could wrap around a blade and render it useless. Bacon was a master of distance control, keeping opponents at bay while the chain did its deadly work. Musashi had to approach. But approaching meant entering the chain's kill zone. The duel erupted with violent intensity. Bacon's chain lashed out, and some accounts claim it caught Musashi's katana, wrapping around the blade, dulling or bending it. This was the Kusarigama's signature move, neutralizing the primary weapon. But this is where Musashi's two-sword style proved revolutionary. As the chain ensnared his long sword, Musashi didn't panic. He didn't try to wrench it free like countless swordsmen before him had done, a fatal mistake that always cost them their balance and their lives. Instead, Musashi did something unexpected. He released the pressure on his trapped katana and simultaneously drew his wakizashi, his short sword. In that split second, as Bacon prepared to finish the seemingly disarmed swordsman, Musashi closed the distance. The chain was extended, the weight at its far reach. Bacon's sickle was positioned for a follow-up strike. But Musashi was already inside the weapon's optimal range. The wakizashi, the blade samurai traditionally reserved for ritual suicide, became a killing weapon. There are differing accounts of exactly how the strike landed. Some say Musashi thrust the short blade directly into Bacon's torso. Others claim he struck at the neck or vital points with terrifying precision. What all accounts agree on is this: the blow was fatal, and it was immediate. Bacon collapsed. But even as their master fell, Bacon's students rushed at Musashi, weapons drawn, ready to avenge their teacher. This was the real test. A wounded Musashi, his primary sword potentially damaged, surrounded by multiple armed attackers in their own territory. Musashi responded with both blades now freed, the two-sword technique he'd been perfecting. The students saw something in Musashi's eyes, in the way he moved, in his absolute readiness to cut down every single one of them without hesitation. They fled, terrified. Some accounts suggest Musashi displayed almost supernatural speed and killing intent, wielding both swords in a whirlwind of steel that sent the students scrambling down the mountain path. So why do we still talk about this duel over 400 years later? First, because it validated Musashi's two-sword style against what was considered an almost unbeatable weapon. The Kusarigama had a legendary reputation for defeating swordsmen. Its range advantage, its ability to disarm opponents, and its unconventional attack patterns made it a nightmare matchup for traditional sword schools. Musashi proved that adaptability and unconventional thinking could overcome even the most unconventional weapon. Second, this duel demonstrated the core of Musashi's emerging philosophy. Don't be rigid. When his long sword was trapped, he didn't try to force the situation. He adapted instantly. This concept of flowing like water, of using whatever works in the moment, would later become central to his teachings in the Book of Five Rings. Third, the duel entered the canon of Musashi legends. While it's true that we can't be absolutely certain of Bacon's historical existence, the first written record appears 170 years after the fact. The story became part of how Japanese culture understood Musashi's journey. Real or embellished, it represented the wandering swordsman facing and defeating the unexpected. Did Musashi himself write about this fight? Interestingly, no. In the Book of Five Rings, written near the end of his life, Musashi mentions fighting over 60 duels, but rarely names specific opponents. He was more interested in extracting lessons than glorifying victories. But the duel with Bacon stuck in oral tradition and was recorded in the Nitenki, suggesting that witnesses or Musashi's later students considered it significant enough to preserve. The image of the young swordsman defeating the chain and sickle master became shorthand for intelligence overcoming unconventional threats. The Kusarigama itself would never be the same. After this duel, and others like it, the weapon's mystique faded. By the time Japan entered the peaceful Edo period, the Kusarigama became primarily a training weapon in martial arts schools, respected but no longer feared as it once was. In the mountains of Iga province in 1607, two philosophies of combat collided. One believed in the supremacy of the unconventional weapon, the chain that could reach where swords couldn't, the sickle that could hook and slash in ways katanas couldn't. The other believed in the supremacy of adaptability, the mind that could read combat in real time, the warrior who carried multiple tools and knew when to abandon one for another. Musashi walked away from that mountain. Bacon did not. And in doing so, Musashi added another layer to what would become his legendary status. Not just as a swordsman, but as a tactical genius who understood that the greatest weapon wasn't in your hands, it was in your mind. The Kusarigama would become a historical curiosity, practiced in dojos but rarely seen in real combat. But Musashi's two-sword style, forged in duels like this one, would survive for centuries. Because in the end, it wasn't about which weapon was better. It was about who could adapt faster when everything went wrong. From a blade that swings to a barrel that fires. Musashi was a swordsman, but his next opponent brought a gun to a sword fight. Let's see how that went. The night air was cold in Kyoto. March 1604. 21-year-old Miyamoto Musashi walked alone toward a massive pine tree outside Ichijoji Temple in the northeastern part of the city. The tree was called Sagarimatsu, the lowering pine, and it cast long shadows in the moonlight. He was here for a duel. His opponent? A 12-year-old boy named Yoshioka Matashichiro. It should have been easy. Musashi had already defeated the boy's two older brothers. The first, Seijuro, he'd crippled with a broken arm. The second, Denshichiro, he'd killed with a wooden sword to the skull. Now the family wanted one final match. Just the boy. That's what they'd said. But something felt wrong. Why would they challenge him at night? Why this isolated location? Why did they insist on nighttime when duels were traditionally fought at dawn? Musashi didn't trust it. So he arrived early, hours early, and he hid. From the bushes, he watched as the boy arrived, not in simple dueling clothes, but in full battle armor. Behind him came his retinue, then more men, then more. They spread out around the clearing, taking positions behind trees, rocks, and shadows. Musashi counted them, 60, maybe 70, maybe more. Swordsmen, archers with yumi bows, and matchlock gunners carrying Tanegashima. This wasn't a duel. This was an assassination. At 21 years old, Musashi was already building a reputation as one of the deadliest swordsmen in Japan. But he wasn't famous yet. Not like he would become later. He'd fought his first duel at 13 years old, killing a man named Arima Kihei. At 16 or 17, he'd fought at the Battle of Sekigahara, one of the largest battles in Japanese history. That battle involved thousands of Tanegashima matchlock guns. Musashi had seen firsthand what firearms could do on a battlefield. Now, at 21, he'd arrived in Kyoto with a simple goal: test himself against the best swordsmen in Japan. And in Kyoto, the best meant the Yoshioka school. The Yoshioka family ran one of the 8 major martial arts schools in Kyoto. They weren't just instructors. They were sword masters to the Ashikaga shogunate. That's like being the official fencing coaches to royalty. They also ran a successful textile business, famous for their kenpozome, blue dye. They had money. They had prestige. They had political connections. They were, in every sense, at the top of Kyoto's martial arts world. So when this unknown 20-year-old from the countryside walked into their city and challenged their master, they were annoyed. Musashi challenged Seijuro, the head of the Yoshioka school, to a duel outside Rendaiji Temple. The terms were simple: wooden swords, single decisive blow. First to land a clean strike wins. Musashi employed his signature psychological tactic. He arrived late. Very late. Seijuro waited, growing more anxious and irritated by the minute. By the time Musashi finally showed up, Seijuro had lost his composure. The fight was quick. Musashi struck Seijuro's left shoulder with such force that he broke the man's arm and knocked him unconscious. Seijuro woke up crippled. His fighting career was over. Humiliated, he retired from the school and became a Zen monk. Leadership of the Yoshioka school passed to his younger brother, Denshichiro. Denshichiro immediately challenged Musashi for revenge. This time, there would be no wooden swords, no rules about single blows. This was a duel to the death. Denshichiro wielded a staff reinforced with steel rings, a brutal weapon designed to break bones and crush skulls. Some sources say he used a ball and chain. Either way, he came prepared to kill. Musashi arrived late again. When they fought, Musashi disarmed Denshichiro in seconds. Then he struck him in the head with his wooden sword. The blow killed him instantly. The second head of the Yoshioka school was dead. Leadership fell to the youngest brother, 12-year-old Yoshioka Matashachiro. Now the family faced a crisis. They'd lost 2 masters. Their reputation was in ruins. Students were leaving. Other schools were mocking them. Everything their family had built for generations was collapsing because of this one swordsman. And the new head of their school was a child. They knew Matashachiro stood no chance in a fair fight. So they made a decision that would abandon every principle of samurai honor they claimed to uphold. They would lure Musashi into an ambush. They would surround him with overwhelming numbers. They would use archers. They would use swordsmen. And they would use guns. If they couldn't beat Musashi with skill, they'd kill him with firepower. The Yoshioka family sent word to Musashi. Young Matashachiro challenged him to one final duel to restore the family honor. The location: near Ichijoji Temple, at the Sagarimatsu pine tree in northeastern Kyoto. The time: nighttime. Musashi accepted, but he was already suspicious. Nighttime duels were unusual. The isolated location was suspicious. The fact that a 12-year-old boy was challenging him made no sense. So Musashi prepared, not by sharpening his sword or practicing his technique. He prepared by planning to arrive early. Hours before the appointed time, Musashi arrived at Ichijoji. He didn't walk to the pine tree. He found a spot in the nearby bushes and hid. And he waited. As the sun set and darkness fell, he watched. First came torches in the distance, then figures moving through the trees, men taking positions around the clearing where the Sagarimatsu pine stood. They weren't making noise. They were spreading out methodically. Then came the boy. Yoshioka Matashachiro arrived in full battle armor. Not the simple clothing you'd wear to a duel, but heavy protective gear. Behind him came his retinue, advisors, bodyguards. And behind them, more men filtered into the darkness. Musashi watched them take their positions. Swordsmen behind trees and rocks, archers with bows drawn, arrows ready, and Tanegashima gunners, their matchlocks primed, the slow-burning match cords glowing faintly in the darkness. 60 men, 70, maybe more. All waiting for Musashi to walk into the clearing. Musashi waited. He watched Matoshichiro and his guards standing in the moonlight. He identified where the gunners were positioned. He noted the archers' line of sight. He calculated his escape routes. Then, when the moment was right, he moved. Musashi exploded from the bushes, not walking, sprinting. He covered the distance to Matoshichiro in seconds. The boy barely had time to turn before Musashi's sword struck. Some sources say Musashi killed him instantly with a single blow. Others say he beheaded him. All sources agree Matoshichiro died in that first moment. Then the trap sprang. The hidden warriors emerged from all sides. Archers loosed arrows, swordsmen charged, and the Tanegashima gunners opened fire. The sound of matchlock fire echoed through the trees. Smoke filled the clearing. Musashi was surrounded, attackers coming from every direction. This was the moment every swordsman feared. Multiple opponents, arrows in the air, gunfire, no escape route. This was supposed to be where Miyamoto Musashi died. In that moment, surrounded by death, Musashi made a decision that would change martial arts history. He drew his second sword. Before this night, samurai used their katana with two hands for maximum power. Or they used one sword while keeping the second sheathed as a backup. But nobody fought with both swords simultaneously. It was considered awkward, impractical. But Musashi didn't have time for conventional wisdom. With his katana in his right hand and his wakizashi in his left, he created something new. A 360-degree zone of attack and defense. One sword to strike, the other to parry. Both moving in coordinated, flowing patterns. He couldn't just fight his way forward. He had to fight in all directions at once. Arrows came from behind, blocked with the short sword. A swordsman charged from the left, cut down with the long sword. Another gunner fired from the right. Musashi moved, the shot missed, and he closed the distance before the man could reload. The Tanegashima was a devastating weapon on the battlefield. But in close quarters, with a swordsman already moving through your ranks, it became a liability. The matchlock took precious seconds to reload. Seconds Musashi didn't give them. He kept moving, never stopping, never staying in one place long enough for the gunners to aim. Every movement was either an attack or a defense. Every step took him closer to the edge of the ambush. Sources vary on how many men he killed. Some say he dispatched half the attackers, some say fewer. But all sources agree on one thing: he survived. Musashi fought through the surrounding warriors and escaped into the nearby rice fields. By the time the Yoshioka retainers regrouped, he was gone. The Yoshioka school was finished. Matoshichiro was dead. The family's honor, what little remained, was destroyed. They had abandoned every principle of Bushido, every code of conduct, and they'd still failed. The school closed its doors in 1614 after fighting for the Toyotomi clan at the siege of Osaka. The family continued their textile business. In fact, they're still famous dyers in Kyoto today. But as a martial arts school, they were done. Musashi walked away from Ichijoji that night with something more valuable than victory. He walked away with an idea. Traditional swordsmanship focused on perfecting technique with a single weapon, maximum power, maximum precision, years of training to master one blade. Musashi rejected that approach. He believed that limiting yourself to one weapon, one technique, one strategy made you predictable, rigid, vulnerable. Instead, he taught adaptability, flexibility, using whatever worked in the moment. His famous text, The Book of Five Rings, written near the end of his life, emphasizes this again and again. Do not have a favorite weapon. Know the times and circumstances. The principle of strategy is having one thing, to know 10,000 things. For Musashi, the two-sword style wasn't about the swords themselves. It was about training your mind to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously, to attack and defend at the same time, to see opportunities others missed. The actual mechanics of Niten Ichi-ryu are precise. The katana, longsword, in your dominant hand provides your primary cutting power and offensive strikes. The wakizashi, short sword, in your weaker hand handles defense and close quarters combat. Both swords move in coordinated patterns, not the same movements, but complementary ones. Where one sword creates an opening, the other exploits it. Where one defends, the other attacks. The style creates overlapping strike zones. An opponent trained against single sword techniques suddenly faces attack angles they've never defended against. The psychological pressure is enormous. It looks impossible to defend against because it's designed to overwhelm conventional defenses. Musashi continued fighting duels for years after that night. Historical records credit him with over 60 duels. Some sources say 66. He was never defeated. But here's something interesting. After age 29, Musashi never used a live blade again. Every duel after that, wooden swords only. Why? Some say it was to prove his skill didn't depend on sharp edges. Others say he'd simply proven everything he needed to prove. His most famous duel came in 1612, 8 years after Ichijoji, when he faced Sasaki Kojiro at Ganryu Island. That's a story we've covered in another video, and it's worth watching. But the foundation of everything Musashi became, his philosophy, his technique, his understanding of combat, was forged that night at Ichijoji when he faced overwhelming odds in firearms. Niten Ichi-ryu still exists today. It's not some ancient style lost to history. It's actively practiced worldwide. The current headmaster is Kajiya Takanori, the 12th generation successor who took over the school in 2013. The curriculum includes 12 techniques with the long sword, 7 techniques with the short sword, 5 techniques with both swords simultaneously, 20 techniques with the staff. Additional training in knife work, grappling, and other weapons. Students still study the same principles Musashi developed after surviving that ambush. The same philosophy of adaptability. The same two-sword coordination. And they still practice in the shadow of the story we've just told. Now here's the part that destroys one of the biggest myths about samurai. Musashi didn't hate guns. He didn't think they were dishonorable. He didn't refuse to acknowledge them. How do we know? Because his entire fighting career took place during the age of firearms. He was born in 1584, 41 years after the Tanegashima arrived in Japan. He grew up when Japan owned 300 to 500,000 firearms. At Sekigahara in 1600, both armies deployed thousands of matchlocks. At the siege of Osaka in 1614 to 1615, where Musashi participated, there were over 300,000 guns involved. Musashi lived, fought, and survived in a world saturated with firearms. And in the Book of Five Rings, written near the end of his life, he never once says guns are dishonorable. He never says true warriors only use swords. He never claims firearms are inferior. What he does say is, adapt, be flexible, use what works. At Ichijoji, facing matchlock gunners, he didn't try to deflect bullets with his sword like some anime hero. He used timing, closing distance before they could reload. He used terrain, keeping obstacles between himself and the gunners. He used speed, never staying still long enough for them to aim. That's the real lesson of that night. Not that swords beat guns, but that intelligence, preparation, and adaptability beat rigid thinking. The night at Ichijoji wasn't Musashi's most famous duel. That honor probably goes to Ganryu Island against Sasaki Kojiro, but it might have been his most important. Because that night, surrounded by swordsmen, archers, and gunmen, with death coming from every direction, Musashi did something that would echo through 400 years of martial arts history. He adapted. He drew that second sword not because it was part of his style, not because he'd trained for years to do it, but because in that moment, it was what survival required. And from that desperate improvisation came Niten Ichi-ryu. Came the philosophy he'd write about decades later. Came the legend of the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. Musashi didn't survive because he was the strongest. He survived because he was the most adaptable. He didn't win because his technique was perfect. He won because he was willing to create a new technique in the moment he needed it. The Yoshioka family planned the perfect assassination. Overwhelming numbers, firearms, darkness, surprise. They forgot one thing. They were trying to kill someone who'd already survived a battlefield filled with thousands of guns at Sekigahara. Someone who understood that war, real war, isn't about honor codes or rigid traditions. It's about winning, by any means necessary. That night, under the Sagarimatsu pine, Miyamoto Musashi proved something important. Not that swords were superior to guns, but that a warrior's greatest weapon isn't what they hold in their hands. It's what they carry in their mind. The willingness to adapt, to improvise, to survive. That's the real way of the warrior. And it's why, 4 centuries later, we're still telling his story. Survive a bullet, next face a spear. The Yari had reach, speed, and a soldier behind it. Musashi's answer? Terrifyingly simple.
The name alone commands respect across centuries. 60 duels, 60 victories, never defeated. The greatest swordsman in Japanese history. A man who killed his first opponent at age 13 and spent his entire life perfecting the art of combat. But there's a story most people don't know. A moment where the undefeated legend stood before his opponent and said 3 words that shocked everyone present. I am defeated. The weapon that brought Musashi to admit defeat? Not another sword, not a legendary blade. It was a spear, a bamboo cross-shaped spear in the hands of a master named Takada Matabe. This is the story of the day Miyamoto Musashi met his match. The day the sword faced the spear, and both warriors walked away with something more valuable than victory: mutual respect and the truth about combat. Now, let's understand their first encounter and how this legendary duel came to be. The year is 1604. Miyamoto Musashi is 20 years old, and his reputation is already growing. Shortly after his series of duels with the Yoshioka clan in Kyoto in 1605, Musashi made his way to Hozoin Temple in the south of the city. This wasn't a casual visit. The temple was renowned across Japan for housing masters of the spear. Musashi came to test himself against the best, to see if his 2-sword technique could overcome the reach and versatility of the legendary Hozoin Ryu spear school. To understand why Musashi traveled here, you need to know about the man who created this school. Hozoin Ryu was founded by Hozoin Kakuzenbo Ine, who lived from 1521 to 1607. Ine was a Buddhist monk at Kofukuji Temple in Nara, but he wasn't your typical peaceful monk. He adored martial arts and trained intensely in swordsmanship while being mentored by Daizen Dayu Moritada, a master of the spear. But Ine wasn't satisfied with traditional spear techniques. He wanted something revolutionary. Legend says that one evening, Ine was walking by Sarusawa Pond at Kofukuji Temple. He saw the reflection of the crescent moon shining on the water's surface, and in that moment, inspiration struck. He imagined a spear with a cross-shaped spearhead, curved blades extending from the main point. He believed this style of spear would be far more effective in combat than anything that existed. This weapon became known as the Jumonji Yari, the cross spear, and it changed everything. The Hozoin Ryu motto became, "It can be a spear to thrust. It can be a naginata to cleave. It can be a kama to slash. In any case, it never fails to hit the target." This wasn't just about reach. The cross-shaped blade could thrust like a traditional spear, hook an opponent's weapon and control it, slash with the curved side blades, trap and disarm. Against a sword, this was a nightmare to face. When Musashi arrived at Hosoin Temple, he wanted to challenge the founder, Ine himself. But there was a problem. In 1604, Hosoin Ine was 84 years old, far too elderly to fight. His successor, Inshun, was only 16 years old and too young to face someone of Musashi's caliber. So the honor of defending the school's reputation fell to their top student, Okuzoin Doei. Picture this: a young Musashi, dual wooden swords in hand, facing a master spearman wielding a kama Yari, a cross-shaped spear with curved blades designed to hook and control any weapon. Despite using a short wooden sword against the superior reach of the cross-shaped spear, Musashi was able to penetrate the spear's defenses and defeated Okuzoin in 2 rounds. Musashi won. But something unexpected happened. Most warriors who defeated their opponents would leave, satisfied with their victory and ready to move on to the next challenge. Musashi didn't. Musashi was so impressed by the Hosoin spear technique that he stayed at the temple for several months. He studied their methods, exchanged fighting techniques with the monks, and spent hours discussing Zen philosophy with the head monk. This tells you everything about Musashi's character. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a student of combat. He recognized that even though he had won, the spear technique had something valuable to teach him. The reach, the hooking ability, the way the crossblade could control distance, all of it fascinated him. During his time at the temple, Musashi witnessed the training of a new generation of spearmasters. Inshun, Ine's successor, was training a group of 6 incredibly talented disciples who became known as the 6 Tengus: Nakagawa Hanyu, Shibata Kaimon, Takada Matabe, Hasegawa Kuranosuke, Isono Shumei, and Tanaka Kanbei. These men would become legends in their own right. One of those 6 would meet Musashi again, 30 years later, in a duel that would force even the Sword Saint to admit defeat. The Hosoin Ryu taught nowadays actually comes from the secular line founded by Takada Matabe, one of those 6 Tengus. Takada Matabe was born as Takada Yoshitsugu in 1590 in Iga Province, Japan, the same region famous for its ninja clans. From a young age, he trained in the warrior arts, but he was especially drawn to Yari techniques, the art of the spear. While Musashi was wandering Japan perfecting his 2-sword technique, Matabe was doing the same with the spear. But their paths would intersect in ways neither could have predicted. Matabe trained under Inshun at Hosoin Temple and became one of the 6 Tengus, the elite disciples who would carry the school's legacy forward. After receiving complete transmission, called Inka, in Hosoin Ryu, Matabe didn't stop. He trained with other martial schools, absorbing techniques and philosophies from different traditions. Eventually, he created his own variation, Hosoin Ryu Takada Ha Sojutsu, which became the lineage that continues to this day. Here's what makes Matabe different from many martial artists of his era. Matabe didn't care much for competitions or duels for the sake of reputation. He saw value in real conflict and actual combat experience. He participated in genuine battles, including the brutal Shimabara Rebellion. The Shimabara Rebellion was one of the bloodiest uprisings in Japanese history, a desperate Christian peasant revolt that ended in a massacre. Matabe fought in that chaos, where survival meant more than technique. It meant adaptability, endurance, and real killing skill. This wasn't a dojo fighter. This was a man who had seen death, dealt death, and understood the difference between sport and war. By the 1630s, both Musashi and Matabe had become legends in their respective arts, and they knew each other. While Musashi was staying in Kokura, Matabe had visited him many times to receive his unique teachings. They had a mentor-student dynamic, with mutual respect flowing both ways. Think about that. Matabe, a master spearman in his own right, founder of his own school, was humble enough to learn from Musashi. And Musashi, despite being the greatest swordsman alive, respected Matabe's skill enough to teach him. They weren't rivals. They were fellow seekers of martial perfection. But in 1634, politics would force them into a confrontation neither wanted. In 1634, while Musashi was in his early 50s, a duel was arranged by Lord Ogasawara between Musashi and the lance specialist Takada Matabe. Lord Ogasawara requested that Matabe duel Musashi. Matabe was compelled to fight, even though he had not wanted to, as he had to obey his lord's command. This wasn't a grudge match. This was political theater. Imagine being forced to fight someone you respect, someone who has taught you, someone you consider a fellow master. Both men understood this was about spectacle, about entertaining the Lord and his court. But they were also both warriors who understood that even a friendly bout reveals truth. Since it was a friendly bout, no live weapons would be used. Training weapons were chosen to avoid bloodshed. The duel would follow a point system based on scoring a clean hit, whether physical or theoretical. Matabe chose a bamboo jumonji yari, a cross spear, with padding on the tip and a small strip of bamboo inserted about a foot under the spearhead to act as the crossbar. His weapon was roughly 9 shaku long, about 9 feet or 2.7 meters. Musashi chose a single bokuto, a wooden sword, which was much shorter than his adversary's weapon. The reach difference was massive. Matabe had nearly 6 feet of reach advantage. In a combat situation, that should be insurmountable. The onlookers gathered. Lord Ogasawara sat in his place of honor. The two masters bowed and took their positions. At the beginning of their duel, Matabe attacked Musashi with his lance. Musashi calmly penetrated into close range, using the middle-level guard, and scored the first point. This is what made Musashi legendary. The ability to close distance against a longer weapon isn't about speed. It's about timing, reading your opponent, and moving in the exact moment their weapon is committed to an attack and can't be pulled back fast enough. The second bout went the same way. Musashi again managed to penetrate Matabe's reach and scored another point. At this point, conventional wisdom says the duel is over. Musashi has won twice. His legend grows. Matabe has fought honorably, but been bested. But something was about to happen that would shock everyone present. They reset. Matabe adjusted his stance. Maybe he was reading Musashi's timing now. Maybe he was waiting for a different opening. In the third bout, Matabe's lance slid between Musashi's legs, making contact. A touch. A single touch. In the point system they were using, this counted. Here's where Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated legend, the man who had killed over 60 opponents, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history, did something that defines his true character. Musashi immediately said, "I was touched, therefore I lost this time." He then turned to all of the onlookers and spoke about how much of an adept Matabe was with the lance, praising his skill publicly. Think about what this means. Musashi had already won 2 rounds. He could have dismissed it. He could have said it didn't count, that it was between the legs and not a killing blow. He could have demanded they continue until he won 3 rounds. Instead, he acknowledged the touch. He called it a loss, and he praised his opponent. This is the mark of a true master. Not just skill with a weapon, but the character to recognize when someone has bested you, even in a single exchange. But Matabe wasn't finished showing his own character. Before the duel could continue, Matabe suddenly called for the duel to stop. He put down his weapon and gave up, saying, "The spear is a long weapon compared to the sword, which is a shorter weapon. Despite having a considerable reach advantage, I was not able to claim victory in 3 exchanges. In the end, I am bested while wielding my long, prized possession." Later, Matabe said after the duel, "Master Musashi is a true adept whom I was unable to touch," even though he literally had just touched Musashi. Lord Ogasawara, satisfied with the display of skills from both warriors, concluded the duel at 3 exchanges and called it a draw. Both men bowed. Both men had shown not just their martial skill, but something far more rare: humility, respect, and the wisdom to recognize greatness in another. This duel matters more than any of Musashi's victories. When you win 60 duels and kill 60 opponents, people remember your skill. But when you publicly acknowledge that you are defeated and give your opponent the due credit, people remember your character. Musashi could have been just another killer, another warrior obsessed with an undefeated record. Instead, he became a philosopher, a teacher, and a man who understood that true mastery isn't about never losing, it's about learning from every encounter. The spear had every advantage: 9 feet of reach versus 3 feet, the ability to hook, thrust, slash, and control distance. In the hands of a master like Takada Matabe, it was nearly unbeatable. But Musashi's ability to close distance, twice, showed that skill can overcome physical disadvantages. And Matabe's single touch showed that even the greatest warrior in history isn't invincible. The Hozoin Ryu spear techniques that are taught today come directly from Takada Matabe's lineage, the Takada Ha line. His humility, his dedication to real combat experience, and his willingness to learn from others, including Musashi, made him the master whose teachings survived. Musashi went on to write the Book of 5 Rings, where he discussed strategy, philosophy, and the nature of combat. He understood that acknowledging the spear's effectiveness wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Both men walked away from that duel with something more valuable than victory. They walked away with the truth that mastery is never complete, that every weapon has its place, and that respect between warriors transcends the outcome of any single fight. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real history behind Musashi's legend, hit that subscribe button. We're exploring more legendary duels, more samurai weapons, and more stories where history is stranger and more fascinating than fiction. Drop a comment below. Do you think Musashi truly lost that 3rd exchange, or was he being overly humble? And could you imagine yourself having the character to admit defeat when you'd already won twice?
And finally, we end where every samurai story ends. Blade to blade. The katana duel is the one Musashi was born for. This is the one you've been waiting for. Himeji, 1621. A man shows up at Miyamoto Musashi's door. He is the chief swordsman of one of the most powerful lords in the region. He has trained his entire life in one of Japan's oldest sword traditions, a lineage going back centuries. He carries the authority of his lord behind him. His job is simple. His lord saw a sign outside a local dojo. The sign read, "Miyamoto Musashi, the #1 adept of the sword in all of Japan." No lord, no title, no clan, just a wandering ronin with the audacity to plant that sign in someone else's city. So the man, Miyake Gunbei, is sent to handle it. Either he defeats Musashi and the ronin leaves quietly, or Musashi wins and proves himself worth hiring. Either way, the lord wins. Simple enough. Gunbei arrives. He is shown to an anteroom and told to wait. He waits 5 minutes. 10, 20, an hour passes. When Musashi finally strolls out, he looks at Gunbei and says, "And I want you to really hear this. If I had been informed the purpose of your visit was combat, I would have come sooner. I was in the middle of a game of Go, a board game." He kept the Lord's chief swordsman waiting for an hour because of a board game. They step into the garden. And what happens next is one of the most important exchanges in the entire history of Japanese swordsmanship. By 1621, Musashi is somewhere between 35 and 38 years old. He has already fought and won over 60 duels. He killed Sasaki Kojiro 9 years ago, the most famous duel in samurai history. He survived the siege of Osaka. He has an adopted son. He's already written his first scroll on strategy. And yet, he has no lord. He's a ronin, a masterless samurai drifting from city to city. Not because nobody wants him. He applied to become swordmaster to the shogun himself and was turned down. That job went to Yagyu Munenori. So Musashi, the greatest fighter alive, is politically homeless. He arrives in Himeji and does what Musashi does. He opens a dojo. He puts up a sign declaring himself Japan's greatest swordsman. And he waits to see who shows up. Himeji at this time is the domain of Lord Honda Tadamasa, son of Honda Tadakatsu, one of the legendary 4 heavenly kings of Tokugawa. This is a family with enormous prestige. The sword school of Honda's retainers, the Togun Ryu, is the official fencing style of the Honda house. These men have trained their entire lives in this tradition. They are not amateurs. And every day, Honda's best swordsmen walk past Musashi's dojo and see that sign. Eventually, Lord Honda hears about it, and he makes a calculated decision. If Musashi truly is the greatest swordsman in Japan, I want him as a retainer. And if he isn't, a duel will make him leave on his own. So he calls in his best man. He calls in Miyake Gunbei. Here's where I want to stop and actually give Gunbei his due, because history has been unkind to him simply because he lost. But this was not a nobody. Gunbei was the chief swordsman of the Honda retinue. In a clan that took swordsmanship as seriously as the Honda family did, being the best sword among those men meant something. The style he practiced, the Togun Ryu, was descended from the Toda Ryu, which came from the ancient Chujo Ryu, one of the oldest sword lineages in Japanese history. We're talking centuries of accumulated knowledge in single sword technique. Classical katana fighting built around precision, timing, and reading an opponent's intent before they move. Interestingly, this same Chujo Ryu lineage also runs through the school of Sasaki Kojiro, the very man Musashi had killed 9 years earlier. So there's a thread connecting all of this. Gunbei had mastered this tradition, and his orders from Honda were not to kill Musashi. They were to test him. That restraint matters, and we'll come back to it. Gunbei arrives at Musashi's dwelling carrying Honda's authority and expecting to be received with some basic respect. Instead, he is shown to an anteroom and left sitting there. An hour goes by. By any standard of the era, this is an outrage. Gunbei is a principal vassal. He represents a lord, and a masterless ronin is keeping him waiting like he's a stranger off the street. When Gunbei's patience finally breaks and he demands to see Musashi, Musashi walks out completely calm and delivers that line about the Go game. Then he says, "Would you care to come out in the garden? I'll leave the choice of weapons up to you." It's a masterclass in psychological pressure before a single weapon is drawn. Gunbei arrives angry. That's exactly where Musashi wants him. Gunbei, remembering his orders, test, don't kill, walks into the garden, finds a piece of bamboo near the fence, cuts it, and takes it as his weapon. No need for live steel if this is meant to be an assessment. Musashi picks up his bakuto, his wooden practice sword. 2 men in a garden in Himeji. No ceremony, no crowd, just the 2 of them. What happens next? And I'll flag here that this comes from the Niten school's own records, which we'll address properly at the end. Goes like this. Gunbei attacks. Musashi retreats. Not in panic, strategically. He's reading Gunbei's timing, cataloging his rhythm, mapping how he moves. Gunbei attacks again. Musashi retreats again. Then Musashi runs out of space. His back hits the wall of the entrance. There is nowhere left to go. And this is exactly the moment Gunbei has been driving toward. He lowers his bamboo weapon, draws it back, and drives it forward in a straight thrust aimed at Musashi's center. In that exact instant, Musashi shouts, "Look out!" And the short sword in his left hand deflects the thrust. In the same motion, the long sword in his right hand drives forward and hits Gunbei directly in the face. Gunbei's own momentum carries him into the strike. Blood pours from the wound. Musashi looks at him and says quietly, "First wipe this blood away." The fight is over. And if you look carefully at what just happened, Musashi used two weapons simultaneously. One to block, one to strike at the same time. Gunbei doesn't rage. He doesn't demand a rematch. He goes quiet. And then, by some accounts, he bows his head and asks to become Musashi's disciple. Think about what that takes. He is the chief swordsman of a lord's retinue. He has devoted his life to the Togen Ryu. He was sent to defeat a Ronin and was instead beaten in seconds by a technique he had never seen. His response isn't shame. It's recognition. He understood immediately that he had just seen something entirely new. He goes back to Lord Honda and delivers his report. The claim on that sign is accurate. Musashi is the real thing. Honda, true to his word, extends an offer. Musashi accepts, at least for a time. He stays in Himeji, teaches, trains disciples, and reportedly even contributes to planning the layout of the town. His adopted son, Mikinosuke, becomes a Honda retainer the following year. Here's why this duel matters beyond just being a good story. Musashi's two-sword style, Niten Ichi Ryu, meaning two heavens as one, is the most famous sword school in Japanese history. It still exists today. The current headmaster is Kajiya Takanori, the 12th generation successor. And the core philosophy of that school comes directly from moments like this one. Traditional swordsmanship at the time was built around using the katana with both hands. Maximum power through a two-handed grip. That was the doctrine every major school taught. Musashi looked at that doctrine and asked a simple question. What if the second hand held a second sword instead? You create overlapping strike zones. You can attack and defend simultaneously. An opponent trained against single sword techniques suddenly faces angles they've never had to defend against. It doesn't just beat you. It makes your training feel wrong. In the Book of Five Rings, written near the end of his life, Musashi puts it plainly, do not have a favorite weapon. The two-sword style wasn't about the swords. It was about teaching the mind to think in multiple dimensions at once. Now, before the conclusion, I want to be straight with you about something. Everything we just described, the two swords, the deflection, the blood, Gunbei becoming a disciple, comes primarily from the Niten school's own historical records. The Niten school being the martial tradition founded by Musashi himself. So you already see the issue. When a school writes its own origin story, it has every incentive to make that story as dramatic as possible. There's a second, earlier source, the Bizun Hokan, that tells a noticeably quieter version. In that account, Musashi and Gunbei face each other in the garden with wooden weapons. Gunbei is outclassed, drops his head in defeat, and goes back to report to his lord. That's it. No blood, no two-sword technique, no dramatic shout. A third source from 1925 broadly matches the simpler version and gives Gunbei a different given name, which raises the possibility that the two accounts might even be about different people entirely. So what actually happened? Honestly, we don't know for certain. What we can say is that Musashi definitively defeated someone from the Honda retinue in Himeji around 1621, that it was significant enough to be recorded in multiple sources, and that from this period onward, his two-sword style is formally documented and taught. Whatever happened in that garden, It mattered. There's something I keep coming back to with this duel. It wasn't supposed to be a legendary fight. It was a job interview. A lord wanted to know if a Ronin was worth hiring, so he sent his best man to find out. And in the middle of that completely ordinary situation, two men with wooden weapons in a garden, something was revealed that would echo through 400 years of martial history. Gunbei represented everything the established order valued: lineage, tradition, loyalty, centuries of accumulated technique in the Togun Ryu. Musashi represented something else, a philosophy built not on tradition, but on what actually works when the moment arrives. The katana, by itself, is the most iconic weapon in human history. Its design is close to perfect, and Gunbei was a master of it. But Musashi looked at the perfect single sword and thought, what if one hand held another one? That question, asked in a garden in Himeji, became Nitanichi Ryu, became the Book of Five Rings, became the legend. In the next video, we'll be going deeper into the katana itself, its history, its design, and what it means in the world of Ghost of Yotei. So make sure you're subscribed for that one. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which duel you want covered next, and I'll see you in the next one.